What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Straddling the line between not being a Luddite and not being a space cowboy when it comes to guns, gear, ammunition, tactics even. That's what we're going to talk about. On the podcast, we talk about guns, gunfighting tactics, ammo, ballistics, philosophy, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to put in the bio. If you've heard it before and you don't want to listen, skip around 2 minutes. That's about 4 hits on the fast-forward button. I don't think you should just listen to anybody that's on the internet. I like to establish some credibility with the things God's allowed me to do. So, again, if you've heard it before, skip it. If you just listen to anybody that's talking, I guess, and take advice from anybody that's on the internet, which I don't advise, then skip it as well. And we'll get into the main topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other 3-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder, certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God. All the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength. It's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talents, skills, and abilities to serve you today. Okay, so originally I did this as a Patreon-only episode. It's already been recorded for them, and it's a different episode. I talk different to the patrons than I do to the general audience. I think I know them a little bit better. Well, that's just the way that it is. If you want that episode, then become a patron. A lot of times, I will just have these ideas come in when I'm coming back from the range, and I'll do what's called a range report for the patrons. Like, I went to the range, here's what I learned, here's some takeaways, and a lot of times I will snowball into other things. Well, this one, either going to or from the range, was about kind of this philosophy about not being a Luddite, but not jumping on the bandwagon of every new thing, and how, as practical modern gunfighters, we should straddle that line. And it's a hard line to straddle sometimes. It's a hard tightrope to walk. But I think it's important, and I think it's an important enough concept that I want to hash it out here again for you guys, for the general audience. If you're not familiar with what a Luddite is, I don't want to tactic explain to you. I don't want to mansplain to you, but it's somebody that shuns new technology. Now, there's a lot of people that a lot of times think that this thing is just as good as. Like, a Colt single action army was good enough for Wyatt Earp. Colt Peacemaker was good enough for Wyatt Earp, so it's good enough for me. Ignoring the fact that, when Wyatt Earp was around, he used some of the best technology available to him at the time, which was a Colt single action army. If Wyatt Earp was around today, or that timeline had been slightly different, right? Let's say that the Wild West had happened a few decades later, the Civil War had taken a little bit longer, World War I got pushed back, whatever it is, and the Wild West days, his lawman days would have been in the, early 1900s instead of the late 1800s. Might he have been rocking a 1911? If they were common and proven, I bet he probably would have been rocking a 1911. Because it was a giant advancement in firepower for the time. That's why the Army wanted it. They wanted the power of the 45 Long Colt, but in a semi-auto. He probably, if he was a lawman a couple of decades later, would have been rocking a 1911 because he used what was available at the time. Don't get in this romantic idea of it was good enough then, it's just as good as. Likewise, a lot of people say that about the 1911. And this is from somebody that loves the 1911. This is from somebody that was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, and on some missions, I would carry a 45 1911. Even though I wrote the policy, and as long as you qualified with it and shot really well with it, you could carry a lot of things. I would sometimes carry a 1911 and 45. That does not mean that I think a original 1911 is just as good as a modern handgun. I don't. I carried a very modern M45A1. I would not want to carry, unless it was all that I had and I had no other option, it's certainly better than no gun, I would not want to carry a World War I, like 1913 production 1911. Those sights are pretty bad. I like really good modern combat sights. I like tritium night sights if I'm rocking irons. I like an extended beaver tail. I like a flat backstrap. I like a flat trigger. I like G10 grips. There's been a lot of technology advancements in the modern 1911. The 1911 has kind of stood the test of time with modern improvements. But World War I 1911 is not just as good as a modern combat fighting handgun. It's really good for its day. And it has been such a good platform that it has developed over time to still be in the running as a good fighting handgun. But to think that an original, World War I 1911 is just as good as most modern fighting handguns, that's being a Luddite. It's not just as good as. And to get in any era and to think because you love that era and because you romanticize that era and you really love it, is just as good as, when it's not. To think that, guns hit their peak in the 1980s with mullets and a bunch of roided out action heroes. To think that, the 1980s guns are just as good as modern guns. Like, this is somebody that routinely carries a SIG 226 as my primary carry gun. But I don't carry an original military 226. I don't think that's just as good as for carry. I carry a single action 226 Legion hammerback safety on, because I think for that, where I have to go from completely concealed to getting rounds on target quickly, single action only hammerback safety on with that really beautiful single action trigger is better. That's better than the original 226. I also have G10 grips on it. Again, I like the grippiness of that over the original cheap plastic grips. I also have it direct cut, like into a T-top, into a convertible for a direct mount Trijicon RMR, because I think a Trijicon RMR is a force multiplier. I was kind of a Luddite to call myself out on the red dots for way longer than I should have been. For a long time, I was against them, and I told my guys when I was the commander to stay away from them. I was like, I don't trust them. I don't trust crap with batteries. They're going to break. They're not going to hold to zero, this and that. Just don't even bother. You can shoot good with iron sights. And then I thought, instead of just bashing something for longer than I should have, maybe I should actually get out and run them and test them myself. And I did, and I realized I was wrong. Was probably right to be skeptical at first, but I was a Luddite way too long when it comes to optical sights on a handgun. And one of the things that changed my mind, one of the guys I really respected that did some really good professional training. If you're looking for really good professional training, I'm not sponsored by them. I don't even know that they know that I do this podcast. But PFC, Progressive Force Concepts, out of Vegas, if you're looking for really good practical firearms training. Again, not affiliated with them. I get no kickbacks from them. I don't even think they know that I do this podcast and that anything like that. But PFC, they do good training. Anyway, I was in one of these classes, and I noticed from the last class to the class that I took, one of the main instructors was running an optic on his handgun. And I said, well, that's new. Explain why. I was like, yeah, but what if it breaks? And he's like, well, iron sights break. And it was just like a slap in the face, which I needed. Because you're right, iron sights do break. I've seen plenty of sights break. So the fact that a optic on a handgun might break, okay, that it might, but iron sights break, right? Traditional post-notch sights break on a handgun, especially when you're using them hard and beating the crap out of them and running them into barricades and running and stopping and falling and doing wind sprints, and they go flying out of the holster and hit rocks. Like, that stuff breaks. So that's not really a valid argument. And especially if you have a co-witness, which I really recommend if you're going to run an optical sight on a handgun, co-witness, backup iron sights. That way you have some redundancy. If one breaks, you have the other. But to call myself out, I was a Luddite for far too long on the optics on a handgun. I started running them and actually giving them a shot, and I was like, wow, this is a force multiplier. This really can make a big difference. Not as a crutch, not if you're a crappy handgun shooter, throw a dot on your handgun and now you're going to be a good handgun shooter. But if you're waiting, like if you're ready to get another good shot off and you're waiting to line up iron sights, you might be able to wring out some more celerity with getting quick, accurate shots on target at varying distances and target transitions with a red dot, with a optical sight on a handgun. That's what I mean about don't be a Luddite. Like, if there's new technology that's good and proven, then use it. But don't get... The other side of this is, don't get caught up in this everything new, I'm going to call them space cowboys. There's a worse name for them that I'm not going to use on here, that I'm not going to use for the general audience. That usually a unit will have one of these guys, and there's a name for them. But we'll call him like a tactical space cowboy. The guy that's like, every new thing is the best. Did you see this new RIP ammo? It's super light and super fast, and Elon Musk era technology, and it just rips watermelons apart, and it's a game changer. How dare you run a Spear Gold Dot that's been around for decades, it's working good. You could have this new crazy technology ammo, right, that's not proven. To be fair, there's some new ammo that comes out that's really good, but you probably shouldn't, if you're using it for real world scenarios, probably shouldn't be the first adopter of that, right? You kind of are probably familiar, if you're a regular listener, of my 3-year rule. Let something be around and be proven. But there's always those guys that like, have you seen this new knife steel? S30V is so last year, now it's S35BN, but oh wait, my knife that's a month old is not good enough because now there's Magna Cut, and if it's not Magna Cut, you're wrong. There are those guys too. And I think that's the opposite extreme. Because if you're always chasing the next hot thing that may or may not be good, one, it's not proven, and two, you're not spending the time training with your equipment to actually get good at it. And your skill with your equipment is way better, is way more exponentially more important than the gun itself. If I go and run practical drills with a standard, out-of-the-box garbage trigger Glock 17, and, right, or my STI, well, let's make it even more drastic, a standard Glock 17 factory trigger, or one of my really fast competition setup 22s. My split times are faster with that gun. We're talking like in the tenths of a second faster. The difference between an untrained person and a really good shooter is way exponentially more than that, no matter what the gun is. So you get these guys always chasing the new thing, the new hot gun, the new polymer striker fired du jour, the new hashtag #MeToo polymer striker fired handgun, so often that they never get familiar and never get good with the gun that they're running. That's the opposite side of that. Always chasing this next new technology advantage to the detriment of your actual skill and practice and ability. And instead of maybe spending that money on a training class and or a crate of ammo, that you can actually get really good at. You're always chasing the next new thing. And I'm not a Glock fanboy. I don't actually really like Glocks. But I'd say I'd rather have the dude on my team that had a factory Glock 19 with a New York trigger, which is horrible, that had bought a case of ammo and went to a training class, than the guy with the brand new Canic Rival with a Trigicon RMR. Trigicon RMR is kind of old. The Trigicon RMR HD, because HD's so new and cool. That hasn't trained with it, hasn't gone to a class with it, and hasn't put a bunch of ammo through it, right? Hasn't shot it one-handed underneath a car, laying in urban prone to see if the gun's going to malfunction, right? I'd rather have the dude with the factory Glock with the horrible trigger and iron sights that was familiar with that gun and ran it. I'm not saying you have to. You could have the guy that really trains and is running a better gun as well with the best of both worlds, but the training and experience with the platform is exponentially more important than the next new gadgety thing. Don't look for a hardware solution to a software problem. They don't make a handgun that fixes your flinch going low left, right? You got to fix that. If you don't have a good proper grip on your handgun, you don't need a compensator on the end of your handgun. You need a really good solid grip on your handgun. Then when you're pushing it and you're waiting for your sight to come back on target and you're like, I can shoot faster than this, I know I can, then maybe a compensator is for you. But you get my point. Like, you get the guy that's just chasing the next new thing at the detriment of actual... The purpose of running the gun is getting hits on target. So you get off into the weeds on both sides of that argument, both sides of that equation. So walk that tightrope. Don't always be the dude jumping on the bandwagon of this next new cool thing. And don't be the guy that's like, well, this thing is just as good as, right? You know, lever action 4570 was good enough to kill buffalo, which in fact most of the buffalo were already dead, and pretty soon 4570 got introduced, buffalo hunting was banned, but let's put that aside. It was good enough to kill buffalo, it's good enough, it's just as good as anything else nowadays as a home defense gun, right? But it's not. It's a cool gun, it's a powerhouse, there's a lot of cool stuff, especially if you want to like reload black powder for it and some stuff like that. It's not the worst gun ever, but it's not just as good as a modern gun for home defense, for many other things. So don't be that guy. It's like, don't be Amish when it comes to guns. Like, guns hit their epitome of perfection in 1861. And don't be the guy that's like, if it came out before the pandemic, it's garbage. Like, find what's actually still really good that's proven. Because here's the thing. If you want to chase the latest and greatest gear, that's fine. And if you want to shoot old, antiquated, antique guns, that's fine. If you want to collect Mosin Nagants, you want a Remington Mosin Nagant, you want a Westinghouse Mosin Nagant, you want whoever made them for the French Mosin Nagant, you want to collect those and have a beautiful gun collection. I'm not a gun collector, but if you are, that's fine. This is not gun collector life. But don't carry a Mosin Nagant in your truck if you can afford something better and think this was good enough for Selmohaya, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, the Finnish sniper of World War II, so it's good enough for me. Right? No, he used that because that's what he had. Right? If you give him a newer, still not very new, an M21, M24 sniper rifle, he would have taken it, I'm sure. It was not just as good as. Likewise, if there's some new, crazy, game-changing ammo going to render all other, ammo obsolete, or, they came out with the 224 Valkyrie is X amount of feet per second faster than the 223, so the 223 is obsolete, so I'm going to sell my raggedy old AR and get a 224 Valkyrie because it's the wave of the future, which came out a few years ago and was already pretty much obscure. You get the idea. And you're not going out and buying cases of ammo and training with it because it's hard to come by and it's expensive and all that stuff. Here's the thing. If it's a gun-fighting gun, that's a serious matter, right? I'm not saying you can't collect cool, new, awesome guns and try them out. I'm not saying you shouldn't collect cool, old, antique guns. But if it's for a modern, practical, defensive, fighting gun, your life or somebody else's life may depend on that. So that should make you a little bit more considerate on your part and your choices and not get something because it's old school and it's cool, and not get something because it's a new cool game changer that may or may not work. Judge it righteously. Judge it based on its actual merits. Not what you want the truth to be, but what it actually is. If you're talking about a modern fighting gun. Human life is too precious to risk it on either old school cool factor or cutting edge, edgy, unproven technology factor. Right? Get a good, solid choice. And that's kind of the main point I want to drive home on this episode. With that, your tactical tip of the day. How about a quick thing on range snacks? Like you go into the range, you going for a long day at the range or a training class or a training course. What are some things to bring for snacks? Obviously, you want to bring plenty of water. For snacks, I would encourage you to bring things that you don't have to touch with your hands because your hands are going to be dirty, covered in like CLP, lubricant, lead, mercury, because mercury is usually in priming compounds. Like, get something that you don't have to touch is my advice. A real cheap, easy answer for this, filling, inexpensive, or the little like single serving packs of peanuts, whatever flavor you like. You can get the crazy spicy ones or almonds like the Blue Diamond almonds. Those are just easy. You have a couple of those around that you grab and go when you grab your range supplies. Probably not in your range bag because if one busts open, it's covered in salt. Not good for guns. But somewhere near your range stuff, just a bag of assorted ones of those. Also, protein bars. Just, they're good. They're filling. They generally have some fiber and stuff in there too. But just good, some kind of bar. I don't generally eat a lot of carbs. But if you want like a granola bar or something, that would work too. A Cliff bar if you eat sugar and carbs. Basically a candy bar. So I guess if you want a candy bar, anything like that that's easy to eat, that's not going to take a lot of time to eat, and you don't have to touch with your hands. At the range, a lot of times there's not time or facilities to wash your hands properly. And if you shoot a lot, you live that kind of lifestyle where you shoot and handle guns daily, you want to be careful of that lead stuff. So if you're going to eat like on a break during a range day or something, consider foods that you don't have to touch with your hands. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. It's a great thing to remember going through life. Watch and pray. It reminds me of another verse that I have been thinking on today since I read it this morning in my morning Bible study. Rejoice always, pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. And thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.